the mayor's State of the City address. Yeah, oh, fantastic, good. So you know that small business got a shout out, innovation got a shout out. Clearly, very much on the mayor's radar. I think 3210 got a very specific shout out, but that is part of kind of an underlying theme of diversification of economy and workforce within the city of Huntsville and in the metro region. The idea that we're really good at bringing in big industry, but signing free agents is fantastic, but growing your farm system is just as important. Growing your own talent and creating that talent locally is just as important. And there's a recognition of that on the citywide basis that's very important. But you also notice one of the other big things that he talked about, if you listened, is he used the term quality of life or livability multiple times throughout the talk. And I'm going to focus a little bit on that today, just because I think quality of life is something that affects all of us, not just in the way we're living day to day, but also in our ability to do business and our ability to attract clients and our ability to attract new workers. Having a great place to live, being able to sell your city as not just an economic engine, but a place where people want to be, that's vitally important. So now I'm going to test this. So what we've been doing is the big picture. You can find it at bigpicturehuntsville.com. That should be fairly easy to remember. If you send an email to that address, I will see it. We even have a Facebook page and a hashtag on Twitter. The other big piece that we've just opened up out here in the lobby is our exhibition. And the exhibition is really kind of an outline of where we think this plan is going as we start to articulate it. It's really a list of issues and some principles that we think are going to shape the future of Huntsville. And then it's a series of kind of big ideas, to use a term used earlier, about where we think a lot of our planning effort is going to have to go. Issues like aging in place, issues like diversification of transit, issues like supporting innovation in small business. You'll notice there's a shout out on one of the banners out there that talks specifically about supporting a small business environment. Thank you to Hudson Alpha for hosting this. It's going to be up through the middle of next week, I think, is how long we've got it. But I encourage you to go out there, look through what we've got. This is really us just sort of laying out the work that we've done and the things that we've heard and asking for you to respond to us. Say, is there anything we've missed? Is there anything you'd like to see more of a focus on? Is there anything that you'd like to see played up? Are there specific ideas that you have that could help us implement what we're talking about on that exhibition? And if you miss it here, if you've got to be someplace else, the nice thing about this sort of little banner setup and the reason we did it this way is we take it down, we move it someplace else, and so it will be moving around over the course of the next few months. I think it's going to Parkway Place Mall for a while, as a matter of fact. It's been at UAH, it's been at A&M, it's been at a couple of churches, it's been all over the place. So it's really an opportunity for us to kind of get our message out, tell you what we've been studying, what we've been hearing, and where we think this plan is going, and get you to react to it. Give us your ideas, give us your refinements. That will really help us, and at the end run, it's going to work to create a better plan. Related to the big picture itself, as we've gone through this over the last couple of years, both in our own analysis for planning, but also in a lot of communication with the community, we've really managed to sort of shake out 5 big issues, things that we think we're going to have to deal with in the coming decades. A big one is that balance of development and redevelopment. Some of you have seen a map series that I use where you start out with the 1920s city boundaries of Huntsville, and it's about 4 square miles over downtown. And then over the course of the last century, we've done what we call pancake batter, where it just spreads out and spreads out and spreads out. We're over 214 square miles in area now in terms of just the city of Huntsville. Not metro area, not city of Madsen, not Arsenal, just the city of Huntsville. That makes us larger in square area than Atlanta, than Seattle, than Denver, than Orlando. So we're a very spread out, land-rich city with not a whole heck of a lot of population. What that has an effect on is a lot of those old neighborhoods and old shopping centers in the core kind of get left behind as we grow out. Well, how do we balance that development on the perimeter with development back in the core? Another big one is the future of transportation. Coming from Atlanta, I love how easy it is to drive here. I mean, it's fantastic. When people say there's traffic, I always have to give a little sort of, I mean, if you're sitting at the Arsenal at 7:50 I feel you. But for most of the rest of the time, you know, traffic's not in Atlanta. Yeah, you know, the concrete campus was not always easy to get to at Georgia State. But that's going to change over time, especially if we're successful and as we continue to grow. We're going to add traffic. And one of the challenges is adding transportation options. There's only so much you can build out a car network. How do we do a better job providing transit? How do we do a better job expanding our bicycle network? How do we do a better job making pedestrian connections? Those are big challenges in the future. Another one is dealing with that neighborhood disinvestment. How do you reverse the trends away from communities that the home value is depressed or that there are strip centers? And everyone's seen what planners call gray fields, you know, those old shopping centers that are 20, 30, 40 years old, that everything cool has moved down the road and you're left with some empty storefront and an empty parking lot and it looks kind of blighted. That's not just a bad thing for that shopping center, that's a bad thing typically for the neighborhoods around it. That can cause blight and can cause crime. How do we reuse those and reverse those trends? Economy and workforce obviously is a huge one. It's a big one for y'all as well. We've talked a little bit already about that diversification of workforce, the diversification of scale, that it's important to not only have the Polarises and the GEs and the AdTrans, but it's also important to have those 1, 2-person, 5-person firms. That all makes for a really rich ecosystem of economy, and especially a more diverse one, not just about defense and aerospace, but about recreation, about the craft beer movement is a great example of that you have this maker movement in the city that has created part of an identity for us, and that's vital to our future. But the last one I want to touch on in a little more detail is quality of life investment. And we talked a lot about that. If you saw the video that the mayor put online and used during the talk, I'll be honest with you, sometimes I'm throwing kind of planner stuff at the mayor, and I'm not always sure he's buying what I'm selling, because we're kind of visionary and we're thinking about things that we haven't been doing before, and he sort of makes fun of us for always wanting to spend money that the rest of the city doesn't have. And then he goes off and he pulls that video out, and the first slide on the video talks about accelerated greenway development and partnering with the land trust to build out our greenways more quickly. So he always surprises me because he's actually listening, even though we won't acknowledge it, he's listening. And he's committed to doing these things. If you look at our capital plan and you look at the money that we've set aside for expanding sidewalks, for building out greenways, for developing the new Grissom campus, all these things are things that can roll into quality of life. And I'm going to go through just a few examples. When we talk about quality of life, every industry seems to have its own different term for this. When we talk about it for planners, it's really about when you're not working and you're not at home, what is your life like in a community? And it's not just about how much you enjoy it, but how much of an identity does it give you and give your community? How loyal do you feel to your community because you have this great quality of life? Part of it is schools. You hear a lot about this, and it's not just about the ability to bring in working families that they can plug their kids into schools, but it's also about generating great workforce. That's a big part of quality of life. And I usually linger on this a little bit more in other audiences, but I think some of the stuff behind it is even more important. The idea of developing unique and local shops and restaurants is a huge part of quality of life. That develops, again, that craft beer industry, that develops a lot of identity. It creates a lot of opportunity. It creates a diverse economy, but it's something you enjoy. It's something that gets us out of our homes. It's something that gets us engaging each other. Another big one is, I don't know how many of you may have seen Ryan Gravel's presentation. Ryan Gravel was at Georgia Tech a few years behind me, and he's one of those guys that all the rest of the architects hated because his thesis actually got realized. He came up with his master's thesis was, I know, right? You're all thinking, wait a minute. In architecture, you dream big in your thesis, and then it gets on a shelf in the library, and 20 years from now, someone dusts it off and says, wow, those folks are crazy. But someone looked at his and went, that's not so crazy. And his big thing was the belt line. And the belt line, he recognized a series of rail lines that were either underutilized or unutilized or abandoned around Atlanta. And his idea was to create this multi-use path and potentially long-range transit, forming a ring around downtown Atlanta to reuse existing infrastructure that wasn't being used or wasn't being used to its fullest. And what he's managed to create, or what they've managed to create in Atlanta, has had a huge impact on in-town development and quality of life. Well, why don't we take that same approach to places in Huntsville? Why don't we say, what do we have and how can we reuse it to really add to our quality of life? This is what we call that sort of phantom rail line that runs north-south along the parkway. Huntsville-Madison County Railroad Authority owns it and operates it. You'll see a train. I've been here 3 years and I think I've seen 3 trains on it, so 1 a year. Not exactly the ideal usage for a rail line. There's plenty of opportunities and plenty of examples out there of reusing or overusing routes like that. They have a lot of right-of-way. Why not go ahead and add something like a multi-use path in there? It's a right-of-way that actually links all the way from Alabama A&M through downtown to and beyond Ditto Landing. You think about creating a path that links some of the oldest parts of the city. You're talking about an excellent amenity for the folks who live here. And the interesting thing about when you create places where people want to be, what's interesting is business starts to see that. Commercial entities start to see that. They're like, wow, there are a lot of people there. I wonder if I should be doing business along there. And so you start to see a lot of redevelopment and development in the areas that line it. So it's a great way not only to add a quality of life amenity, but also do a little economic development on the side. Another example, how many of you have heard of the Sky Bridge that got, there you go. That was sort of a target of opportunity with the Tiger Grant. It's looking at doing a bike ped bridge similar to what you might have seen in Greenville, spanning the downtown Main Street, doing a bicycle pedestrian bridge connecting the VBC to Low Mill. When we've been talking about expanding our greenway and bikeway networks, the Great Wall of China really is the parkway. Getting north-south is pretty easy when you're on your bicycle. As David can attest, finding ways to get across and under the parkway is a little bit more of a challenge. So this was looking at potentially using federal funds to build a dedicated bike and ped bridge over the parkway. And fortunately, sometimes in a city of engineers, you get it where like, okay, great, it's going to be a concrete T, and it's going to have chain link fence on the other side because that's the cheapest and most effective way to do it, which I respect, but we wanted to do something a little more iconic. So not only are you coming in and seeing this, being able to use this bike ped bridge, but it becomes sort of a gateway element. It becomes something as beautiful as that Greenville Bridge. It becomes something you really want to look at, and that it almost becomes a landmark for the city. That's another thing that we're looking at. The Holmes Avenue corridor, many of you may have heard that we've been doing some preliminary study on turning it into more of a multimodal corridor. In the short term, doing improved bicycle and pedestrian facilities. This is another one, and if you don't think of it right away, you realize how clear it should have been when you thought about it later, in that it links downtown to UAH, to CRP. It's an underutilized road. Why not make it a bike route? Why not make it more friendly to cyclists and pedestrians and really link those things up better? Sir? That is Holmes Avenue. You can see it right along there. And what we've done is completed a preliminary study on how you can reconfigure the right-of-way to do dedicated bike lanes and improved multi-use paths. Probably get built out in segments, but in the 2017 budget that the City Council just passed, we've set aside almost $12 million to start this up. So this is something that we're actually making a push on, and it's a great pilot project because you can show when you improve public facilities, when you make a public investment, you can see private investment then follow in on the tail. Another big one, obviously, to play up, David, I show this even when you're not here. There's nothing like this on this scale in Atlanta. This is a fantastic amenity, and doing more of this, learning the lesson of Low Mill, is something that we can transfer around the rest of the city. That you're taking something that's a part of your history, that's an existing piece, and saying maybe it's not going to be reused for what it was, and clearly this is not a cotton mill anymore, but there's a way to embrace it, reconfigure it, and create something new and wonderful for your community. This is my favorite place in the city. You go there, you see the cross-section of local entrepreneurs, local artists, you see the wide variety of people coming in and out of there at all hours, and finally a really good coffee shop that if you haven't been to Alchemy, I'll give a little bit of an ad for Alchemy. Great little excellent coffee shop. But that's a fantastic example of taking something historic and part of our existing fabric, re-envisioning it, revitalizing it, and making it a part of our new identity. Another example of that, obviously, is the Stone Middle redevelopment. There are a lot of folks who looked at that old middle school and said, the best thing you could do for that is accidentally back over it with a bulldozer. But you had some folks that looked at it and said there's a way to actually embrace it, to reprogram it. You add a little green space in between, all of a sudden someone else says, hey, I see what you're doing with the brewery there. I'd like to be a part of that. You have Yellowhammer building a brand new building on the other side, and the next thing you know, you have this great little quality of life, this civic node happening where you see a lot of people coming out, experiencing community together, being together, and identifying this as a piece of Huntsville. An example of that, and I'm going to go back to the Beltline. When the Beltline, and it's only about, at best, a third built out, one of the things that comes out of it isn't just a place, it's not just a path that you're walking up and down or riding your bike on every once in a while. It becomes a place where people congregate. It becomes a place where people have this enhanced sense of community. The first year it was out, there were a couple of expats from New Orleans said, we used to do this lantern parade in New Orleans, and it'd be great if we did this kind of maker lantern parade and just sort of do it on the Beltline Trail. First year they had a couple hundred folks come out and watch and build these lanterns. The last year, which was about, I think we're 6 years into it, they had, by most estimates, about 60,000 people on a 3-mile segment of the Beltline to watch a lantern parade. This isn't something that was sponsored by any organization, no civic organization. It wasn't sponsored by the city. It wasn't sponsored by a business. It was community generated. It was people who lived near the Beltline, who experienced the Beltline, wanted to do something that brought all their people together, that brought neighbors together, and that just celebrated being in Atlanta and having a unique part of Atlanta. And that is something that if we build these sort of spaces, if we create these kind of places in Huntsville, we can have the same sort of experiences. We can build the same sort of sense of community. As one example, we talk a lot about the existing Grissom High School that will basically be vacated next year. If you had given this to the city in the past, we would have said, we could probably store a lot of buses there. We could put old equipment in there, great big building that we could use as sort of grandma's attic. The problem with that is it doesn't really think about what that does for the rest of the community. It's kind of a missed opportunity. So we took a step out, backed out and said, all right, how can this actually be an asset for the neighborhoods that surround it? And we said, well, we know we need a theater. Arts Huntsville has been looking for a mid-sized theater, so we keep that. We know we need recreation spaces, so we keep the gyms and the fields. We also know we need a new library. So maybe we take down the old class wing, build a new library, and then create a green space out front, kind of a great lawn, where if you're in the South Huntsville area and say you want to have your own film festival, or you want to do an arts festival, or you want to do a movie night, all of a sudden you have a place to do that. Not that you couldn't do it in the Target parking lot and have it be perfectly fine, but why not have something that feels a little bit more like a civic node, that feels like a town center, that creates a community identity where people can go and hang out and be together. And there are a lot of other places that we can do that throughout the city. And I'll leave on my sort of last favorite graphic. I use this as a sort of microcosm for why we plan for quality of life. Now, I lived in Atlanta. There's this artist named R. Land, who was a bit of a counterculture guy, and he was riffing on the old Florida travel postcards where it'd say, come to sunny Florida, and there's a palm tree and an alligator and a South Beach hotel. And so he said, greetings from Atlanta, no place like it. And then if you start looking in the little block letters, and there's a Target and a Best Buy and a Bed Bath & Beyond, you get what he's saying, right? That if that's what defines your city, if that's what defines your community, then how are you different from any place else? What's your identity? And I say this all the time in case there's someone who works for Target or anything here. I spend a lot of money at Target. These places are important, but when you have people come in from out of town to visit you, you don't say, y'all, I have the most awesome Target that I'm going to show you. It's a Target like you've never seen. You take them places like Low Mill, you take them places like Campus 805, you take them to Montesano Mountain, you take them to Hayes Nature Preserve, you take them to Ditto Landing, the places that are us, that are unique, that make it great to live in the city of Huntsville. So that is a really big part of our focus over the coming decades. Is going to be on continuing to develop that quality of life. So with that, I'll end and take questions for as long as I can.